I'm going to talk about heat and health span, and Ashley is indeed a friend, but this is what happened the last time we got together in Vail. If she asks you to participate, or Chuck asks you to participate in a study, pick the psilocybin one. And it's an interesting story about how I ended up with her rubbing ice cloths on my face, but we'll get to that. Now, another reason I'm excited to be here in Eagle County is because it's one of the longest lived counties in America, with a life expectancy of 85.9 years. So good job, you guys. Pitkin County is slightly higher, but you'll get there. I'm obsessed with this map for a lot of reasons, but at a high level, it's a map of life expectancy in America by county, and the delta, the difference between the longest lived and the less long lived counties is really interesting to me for a number of reasons, but sort of high level, it says that lifespan is malleable at a population level based on, theoretically, we can get everybody up to the Eagle County level. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about for the last 10 or 15 years. Now, unfortunately, throwing money at the problem doesn't seem to be working, because that's what we've been doing with our healthcare system, our conventional healthcare system. The US leads the world in healthcare spending per capita, and we're 40th in life expectancy and 58th in healthy life expectancy. So doing things the way we've been doing them isn't the way to go. And that's another reason I'm excited to be here with Vail Health, because y'all are doing some amazing stuff. So instead of looking at business as usual, I've been fascinated with centenarians, people who live a very long time. Does anybody have like a family member who lived to be 100? Did they smoke cigars and drink whiskey? Good, okay, interesting. Anybody else? Back there with the lights. What was their story?
I just died at 101 a couple years ago.
Oh, nice. And what did she do? What was her? Okay. Maybe low stress, or maybe not. Genes, there you go. That's another interesting explanation. So if you think about, this is Richard Overton. This is probably my second favorite centenarian, besides my grandmother, who lived to be 103. He was born in 1906. Teddy Roosevelt was president, and he made it all the way to Donald Trump. And he said, forget it, I quit. I can't take it anymore. And often these folks live a long time, seemingly not because of their lifestyle habits, but despite them. But the really amazing thing about Mr. Overton is not just that he lived so long, but he stayed healthy for so long. He was driving his pickup truck around Austin, Texas, and lighting his cigars from the stove almost until the day he died. We call this health span, obviously, that's why we're here, how long you stay healthy. And of course, the typical American is not doing quite as well as Mr. Overton. You get to about age 66, and the average person is diagnosed with some kind of chronic disease or disability that compromises their quality of life. And so the problem is we live another 14 years, so that's 10 to 14 years of compromised health. And that's also where most of this spending happens. And so we'd like to extend that period of healthy life as much as we can. Now, people think of it in linear terms, but it's really a kind of a three-dimensional problem. So if you break it down, what do centenarians actually do, right? They delay chronic disease, so heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. They delay these diseases by a decade or two, or don't even get them sometimes. They maintain physical and cognitive function. So I think of my grandmother. She was going up and down the stairs and beating the whole family at Scrabble into her mid-90s. And in fact, she liked to play naughty words. So once she beat my mom, came from behind, beat her on the last play, 7-letter word, titties. Will never be forgotten. And then the last thing, they kind of, these are even-keeled folks. They stay calm, and they're often connected to community and family and friends. They have a reason to get up in the morning. Mr. Overton was connected to his church. He had a big family network around him. And so those three things. And so that starts to seem like more doable, right? If we could address these three dimensions of health span, then we can get somewhere. So how are we going to do this? Well, start with chronic disease. And this is one of my favorite studies that I think has ever been done. It's my favorite diet study. It was a Mediterranean diet study that they did in Spain about 10, 15 years ago. It was called Predimed. And it was super simple, but clever in its design. So they had 7,500 people in 3 groups. And so we're going to kind of replicate it. So you guys over here, you're going to get a bottle of olive oil every week. And you guys in the middle, you're getting a pound of nuts every week. And then you are put on a low-fat diet. Sorry, too bad. And so they kind of waited and watched to see what would happen. This was a bit of a high-risk population, but they didn't have to wait long to see a difference. I apologize for the data slide. It's mainly to show that I'm not making this up. But the people you guys getting the olive oil and the nuts had about a 30% lower rate of heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death than you guys. Sorry, Chuck and Ashley. Yeah. So this is an extraordinary finding. It's, as powerful or more powerful than medications as far as prevention of heart disease. But what's interesting to me is, well, a couple things. One, it wasn't just dietary advice. They were giving people a concrete gift, a change agent, something that would change the way they snacked. So you're snacking on nuts and not pork rinds or whatever they snack on in Mississippi. And you guys with the olive oil, maybe you're having more salads, right? Or you're cooking more dinners for friends, or it's going to change the way you cook, because that is a lot of olive oil to have to get rid of. Anyway, my point is, these small changes can have a big impact in terms of your habits, which then has a downstream impact on your risk of chronic disease. So I love the Predimed study. Okay, now we'll talk about exercise. I'm not going to tell you to exercise because you all exercise, you're all fit. You rode your bike here, which is awesome. But it's a little fable about what happens if you don't exercise. So one morning about 2 months ago, I woke up and let the dog out, and the garage door was open. And I thought, maybe it blew open. And I went outside and went up to my office, which is above the garage, very glamorous. And all my vinyl records were gone. I have about 300 vinyl records, all of them, every single one, even the one that was on the turntable, St. Paul and the Broken Bones, was gone. They're all gone. And I ran outside, and there they were. They were in the driveway, in boxes, strewn down the driveway. And what the hell's going on? And I went out to the front of the house, and I saw this guy in his pickup truck. Like, okay. This guy had been robbing our garage and cleverly picked the vinyl records because they're easy to sell. Unfortunately, they're also quite heavy, so he got tired. And he had to take a little nap in his truck. Meanwhile, he was drunk too. The sun came up, we woke up, I screamed at him, called the police, he drove away, got caught 3 blocks later. and he basically got arrested because he didn't go to CrossFit. And, he's a poor soul, I'm sure, but it struck me as a perfect metaphor for what can happen to us as we get older, as we lose fitness, as we lose muscle, as we don't maintain our health, as we don't maintain our social networks. We kind of lose our freedom, and that's really what it's all about, keeping our freedom. My parents are 85, and they're trying to hang on to their independence as much as they can. So that's why you need to go exercise with Chris Lindley over here, if you can. Okay, that's exercise. Oh, exercise your brain also. This is another favorite study of mine. It's the nun study. They followed about 600 Middle Western nuns throughout their lives. And one of the most interesting findings to me was that when they looked at their journals from when they were younger, they found that the nuns with the more complex and sophisticated writing style actually resisted Alzheimer's disease and dementia and cognitive decline more than the nuns with the more simple writing style. And that kind of gave birth to this notion of cognitive reserve. It's like a mental muscle, So if you build up the complexity of your neural networks, you learn languages, you read books, things like that. The theory is that is like a bulwark against cognitive decline. Okay, social isolation, huge problem in America with phones after the pandemic. More than half of adults, this stunned me, more than half of adults in America feel isolated. This kind of thing only gets worse as you get older, as people spend more time alone for life course reasons and for other reasons. And so being isolated and lonely is associated with more depression and anxiety, lower levels of self-care, higher blood pressure, more cardiovascular risk, worse metabolic health, on and on and on. What can you do about it? Call your parents, call your kids, go out to lunch with somebody. Social connection, I think, is a critical and I think still underappreciated determinant of our health, especially as we get older. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears to and talk about heat. Now, 5 years ago, if you had invited me into this sauna on the coast of Ireland, a not small part of me would have said, that sounds like a terrible idea. I don't want to do that. The idea of being hot. I grew up in Washington, D.C., as Ashley said, hot, steamy place. Didn't like hot weather and didn't like the idea of getting in a sauna. And so the answer might have been no. But at the same time, I was aware of these famous studies from Finland, which came out. Annoyingly, they came out 3 weeks after my first book on longevity was published. So I was kind of pissed off about that. Because they found a really powerful effect of frequent sauna use on markers of cardiovascular health, especially heart attacks. This study found that people who use sauna 4 to 7 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, had about a 22% lower rate of fatal heart attacks. These were middle-aged Finnish men. And then the people who did it 4 to 7 times a week had about a 50% lower rate of heart attacks. That's a stunning effect. And I think it was very unexpected because prior to that, the conversation around heat and physiology was that heat is always something that's dangerous and that you need to protect people against. And this suggested that perhaps heat could be therapeutic in some sense as well. And so that got my attention. Intellectually, I wasn't sold on actually going to sauna until about, I think it was 2022. We had a cold winter It was the big snowy winter that we had, and I live in Salt Lake City, and we had piles of snow on the ground, which we don't normally. And so I started going to the sauna at my gym, just for the heck of it. And I found that I felt better. It was weird. And I kind of got addicted, and I kept going. Then I looked at these studies again and realized that there was actually kind of a great longevity story and a great athletic performance story and a great health story here. And so I dug into them, and that's what led to this book, Hotwired, that I'm talking about. But the most interesting of these studies to me was this one, which found that the same group of people, these middle-aged Finnish men from the 80s, the ones who used sauna the most had up to a 2/3 lower rate of dementia and Alzheimer's. And that got my attention because there aren't a lot of things that we know about that can prevent or delay Alzheimer's disease. It's a big problem, and of course we don't have good treatments. And so potentially heat could be a preventive agent for dementia. Now, this study is also interesting because a different group of researchers looked at a different group of Finnish people, a bigger group of Finnish people of both genders, and found also that the people who used sauna the most had a lower rate, not the most, but actually 2 to 3 times a week, had a lower rate of Alzheimer's disease. So it's not just this one research group. There's an interesting piece in the New York Times about a couple months ago about a guy who had genetic mutations that would have pretty much guaranteed that he would have gotten Alzheimer's disease. There's a specific mutation that basically you get Alzheimer's by the time you're 50, and all his family members had it. He did not. He was in his 70s, and it turned out that he didn't go to sauna, but he had worked in the engine rooms of Navy ships for decades. And researchers are studying him, obviously, and they looked at his blood, and they found that he had a high level of what's called heat shock proteins. So that's a cellular stress response that gets activated in response to not just heat, but other kinds of stress like exercise, things like that. So they think that these heat shock proteins may have protected him against Alzheimer's disease. So if y'all are looking for more research projects, that'd be a good one. Okay, we're going to shift over to sports performance. Okay, who thinks that going for a bike ride or a hike on a hot day is just an awesome thing to do and loves it? Who loves the heat? You, in the back. Guy in the bike shorts too. Okay, who thinks that's absolutely the worst thing you could possibly suggest? I was with the latter group for most of my life, and this is me in the process of scientifically proving that. I went to the Corey Stringer Institute of the University of Connecticut, which is dedicated to studying the impact of heat on athletes and workers and war fighters and people like that. And they're putting me through something called a heat tolerance test, where they have you walk on a treadmill, or in my case, ride a really crappy stationary bike in 100-degree temperatures, 40 degrees humidity. So a typical day in Washington, D.C. And of course, I'm dying, right? I flunked the heat tolerance test, which fit the story that I told myself about being in the heat. So I'm not good at heat. Okay, I just proved it. Did I just cut out? No, okay. Okay, so 2 months later, this is me doing the same test. Same conditions, same bike, same power output, and I'm sitting there smiling and high-fiving the lab guys. So what happened? I did 2 months of what's called heat adaptation training. It's basically limited, intentional exposure to heat. So I would go out and ride my bike in the middle of the day, which is exactly when I used to hate riding my bike, so I just make myself go do it. And the first couple sessions were terrible, but slowly I adapted and got better, and I started to like it. My muscles felt relaxed. I felt calm in the heat. Normally I would kind of panic, and I got used to it. So you know how like a 90-degree day in May, 80-degree day in May feels really, really hot, and then the same day in August feels like a nice day? That's heat adaptation in action. And so we can adapt to heat over time. And athletes have been using this for decades as competitions like the Olympics and the Tour de France and now the World Cup are held in hotter and hotter locations. And it's kind of trickling down to recreational athletes like me and like probably most of us in this room as a tool you can use similar to altitude training to improve your performance and improve your comfort level. I put it to the test. Do we have any Texans? Yep, okay, there's a whoop. So this is a bike ride called the Hotter in Hell 100. It's held in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is a great little town. 100 miles, 100-degree heat. There's really no reason to do this ride except for just see how hot you can stand it, which is just a super Texan way to approach life. And I loved it. And this is me early on in the proceedings, still feeling pretty good. You can tell it's the morning. And then several hours later, looking a little bit cooked, but still upright. And so that changed the story that I believed about myself, and it kind of blew my mind, the extent that somebody like me could adapt to such extreme conditions. It was, by the time we finished, it was 107 degrees on the road. I mean, you know, that's the kind of day where they say, don't go outside. So the power of heat adaptation for athletes, I'm a believer. Okay, we'll switch to cold plunging. I showed this slide to somebody, and they were like, is that you? Like, no, that's not me. Okay, that's our Secretary of Health and Human Services. Can anybody identify the error that he is making in this sequence of photographs? Okay, good one. Yes, jeans. Working out in a sauna with Kid Rock. That's okay. No, the thing he's doing wrong is he is cold plunging immediately after a workout. And so this is another little interesting thing that I stumbled across. There's research showing that cold exposure after workout, after especially resistance workout, actually blunts muscle growth and slows down that muscle protein synthesis that you want after exercise. And so, you know, cold plunge all you want, but just don't do it immediately after a strength workout or in jeans. Okay, now another data slide. Sorry, it's just I'm not making it up. Cognitive function. Well, a hot day, it does get a little harder to work your iPhone and make decisions, and, you know, being too hot is definitely not great for executive function. But targeted heat exposure can do different things. This study found that dunking people in a hot tub essentially increased their levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is thought to improve memory. Okay, that's good. We also have heat shock protein activation, which I talked about, which, you know, helps us keep our marbles together potentially. Better sleep, sauna and better sleep. I always sleep better after sauna, and there's good data around that. Then the Japanese have identified this. The Japanese love sauna. They've identified this post-sauna trance state that they call totono, and it in Japanese it means tidied up, but it's really a kind of calm clarity that you can attain after a few sauna sessions and maybe some cold exposure. Personally, I think that one reason the sauna has been around for 2,000 years is that it's kind of an ancient way to get high. Do you all know what I'm talking about? Have you all felt that feeling of bliss after a sauna? You just kind of don't care about whatever you were worried about before, right? Okay, where am I going with this? Well, my head was filled with all this data, all this biohacker stuff, all these sauna studies and this and that, and I was kind of going crazy. And so my partner Martha and I decided to go to Finland and see what Finnish sauna culture really looked like. And it turned out that they didn't do any of the stuff that I'm talking about. They didn't do any of the biohacker stuff. They didn't think about their heat shock proteins. They didn't think about their heart rate. They didn't think about how long they were in the sauna. They also didn't wear blue jeans in the sauna. It really wasn't about any of that. It wasn't about taking a picture for Instagram. It was just like a thing that you did because all of your ancestors did it, and you did it with your family or you did it with your friends, and you'd been doing it for 2,000 years. They didn't worry about hydration either. They hydrated with a beer often in the sauna. And so it was, and then there's this, it was really all about the steam, about the loili, or the lola, as they call it in Finland. And the steam is thought to carry these positive spirits. And so you pour the water on the rocks, and this steam billows out, and you're sort of enveloped in these kind of good spirits in the lola. It was amazing. And it was weirdly like Finnish people aren't the most social people, aren't the most outgoing folks stereotypically, but at this one sauna that I went to in a town called Tampere, the guys it was all guys, men on one side, women on the other side. They would, do a few rounds, and then they'd sit in the locker room just talking. And my guide was like, yeah, he's an architect, he's on drugs, he's on welfare, he's a lawyer, and they're all talking together. And this guy looks at me and he's like, you guys need this in America. Everybody getting together, naked, talking. So I was like, wow, and it changed my whole approach to wellness. I think before that, I was taking a very sort of individualistic, almost competitive view of aging and wellness. And I think that's a very popular attitude here in this kind of influencer biohacking world. And what if we took a collaborative approach instead? How would that look different? So I came home, and there were no saunas in Salt Lake City at the time. This was just 2 years ago. There weren't any really good places to go. And so I went to hot yoga instead. And of course, hot yoga is terrible, anybody do hot yoga? First time was terrible. Second time, it wasn't that terrible, not that terrible, but second time was a little better. Third time, I was like, this is okay, pretty cool. I start to understand why people seem to get addicted to this slightly insane practice. And I did a little noodling around on PubMed, and I came across this study. This is part of how I got here. Came across this study, randomized controlled trial of yoga, that's interesting, for moderate to severe depression. And, it seemed to be a really pretty solid study, like a great study, actually. And I looked at who was on the author list, and that's how I found my way to Chuck Raison here. And I called him up, and we had this great conversation he told an amazing story about how heat affects the mind. And he asked this one sort of interesting question that I think he's been trying to answer for several years, is heat the gateway to enlightenment? I thought, is heat the gateway to enlightenment? It could be. And so kind of followed that up, and he introduced me to Ashley Mason, And that's how I ended up here, in this tube. And this is something I hadn't expected. I hadn't expected to find that heat affects mental health in positive ways. In fact, I thought it would probably be the opposite, right? It would be a negative. But it turns out that, I'm sure you folks are familiar with these studies, but heating people up to an absurd body temperature, like a fever, appears to relieve symptoms of depression. And I frankly didn't believe it. So I volunteered to try out the chilled protocol here at the hospital. So here I am in the bowels of the Vail Hospital, lying in a little infrared sauna tube like French fries under the heat lamp at Hooters. It was difficult, and then I felt, I felt wrecked afterwards. But then the next day, I started to feel better, and then I'm driving home to Salt Lake City, which is normally a bit of a chore of a drive, and I felt just tremendous. I felt euphoric. I couldn't believe it. It was the night of the only Trump-Biden presidential debate. I flicked that on for a second. That didn't bother me. Flicked it off. Where am I going with this? Anyway, I experienced this treatment, which was extremely difficult. It was more like you would never put yourself through that in a sauna session, but I felt better for weeks afterwards. And so I think heat has a lot of potential. I don't think you need to necessarily do this. I think you can get a little bit of the benefit through just a regular sauna session or a hot tub. Who has a hot tub? What am I saying? I'm in Vail. I'm asking people if they have a hot tub. Saunas are getting all the hype. I think hot tubs are actually just as effective. And so, the heat transfer from the water, I think, is a good way to get your body temperature up. So scientists actually prefer to use hot water immersion sometimes to raise people's body temperature. Anyway, hot tubs are underrated. Anyway, so I think there's a lot of potential in this research, in this sort of way to use heat as a potential mental health treatment, or just mental wellness treatment. Now, okay, so thinking about those 3 areas of health span and how heat might affect them. Well, we've seen that it can delay chronic disease, potentially. We've seen that it can potentially help us maintain physical performance and potentially cognitive function in the sense of memory. And it helps us stay calm and connected. So I'll end with 3 rules as you think about your health and your health going forward in your life. There's a cacophony. The longevity industry has kind of gone crazy lately. And there's a cacophony of voices out there telling you you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, trying to sell you stuff, and on and on and on. And so more and more, I'm thinking the way to go at it is just keep it simple. Focus on the basics first, and then go outward from there. This photo reminds me of the one thing that the longevity scientists that I know, the one thing that they all do, and they never publish about it, and they never write about it, but if you go to a conference, they will always take the stairs everywhere. They're the old guy taking the stairs while these lazy young people are riding the escalator. So that's sort of my inspiration. Keep it simple. Avoid perfectionism. Avoid thinking you have to be as fit as Andrew Huberman, for example, or do everything that Brian Johnson does. 2 longevity influencers who have kind of complicated, extreme protocols. You do you, and do you as best as you can. And the last thing, it has to be fun, right? The whole thing, the whole point, it has to be joyful. So, have your mountain bike ride or ski. There's nothing more joyful than skiing. And I love, it's like the one place where older people can basically feel like kids. And so try to keep some joy in your practice. And so I'll end there. We'll have a last word of wisdom from our friend Seneca. Life is long if you know how to use it. 85.9 years. That's a nice lifespan. Let's make the most of it. Thank you all. And now, okay, we're going to do some questions with Ashley Mason, Chuck Raison, and Dr. Paige Baker Braxton, who's the Senior Director of Behavioral Health. I think I got that right.
Good morning, everyone.
Are we on?
Got us now. Good morning, everyone. Another round of applause for Bill. That was fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
What wonderful storytelling and incredible data. I'm really excited because I have the opportunity to ask some of the questions that you all provided at registration to this incredible panel. The first question I have is for you, Dr. Mason. I know that we are all looking for a prescription around how to use our sauna, and there is no exact answer, but can you tell us how long we need to be in a sauna, how many days we need to go in it per week to really maximize the benefit of heat?
Yes and no. So sorry to disappoint, but there is no one-size-fits-all answer for this. Like Bill was talking about, there are these studies from Finland that have shown that the more you use it in what we call a dose-response fashion, the better whatever the health outcome is. So the people who used the sauna 4 to 7 times a week had better health outcomes than the people who used it 2 or 3 times a week, who had better health outcomes than folks who used it, what was it, zero?
One time a week.
One time.
There was nobody who used it.
Everybody used a sauna in Finland, right?
Yeah, they had no zero comparators. But the important thing to know is that those were longitudinal observational analyses. They asked these men, for the big study that most people are looking at, they asked these men in the 1980s one time, hey, how often do you go in the sauna? How long are you at the sauna? Keep in mind, when you ask people, how long are you at the sauna? That question was worded very loosely. So when you're at the sauna, you're going in for a few minutes, then out for a few minutes, then in for a few minutes. So we don't know exactly how long really they were exposed to the heat versus sitting in the locker room and chatting, right? They might have included all of that time. We don't know. And then when it comes to temperature, people say, oh, if it's not 175 degrees, there's no point. No, that's not true. So when people ask me this question, how often should I go in? What kind should I use? Should I use an infrared sauna, a dry sauna, a hot tub? What should I do? I tell people you should use the thing you like the most, that you're the most likely to keep doing, for as long as you can stand it, but not so long that you're getting a headache, feeling dizzy, getting yourself sick, right? Don't run yourself down doing this too much. Build it up, do it as often as you enjoy it and as you have time for. People ask me how often I go in, and there are weeks I don't go at all because I don't have time. My life it doesn't work for my life. And then there's other weeks where I get to go twice a week, right? So I would say don't perseverate on hitting a certain number, but focus on making it fun, going with your friends, going when you can, and don't worry about how long you were in it or what that temperature meter says. If you're going in a sauna and you're sweating, it's hot enough.
Thank you, Ashley.
That's a good answer.
And I think that goes back to what your 3 suggestions were, right? Let's keep it simple, find joy, and don't be perfect. If it works for your lifestyle, go.
Yeah, and you don't have to do someone else's extreme protocol, which might be based on, might not be based on anything. So yeah, you do you. I mean, I do it once a week, so I'm like the control group in those studies.
Ashley, you talked about sweating, right? It needs to be hot enough to sweat. What happens if we sweat too much? Can someone talk a little bit about salt depletion as a result of sauna, and then maybe some strategies to counteract that?
Yeah, on our first night in Finland, we went to a popular sauna / happy hour spot on the harbor in Helsinki, really a great place called Lola. And we didn't drink enough. And so the next morning we woke up and we're crabby and we're sore. And Martha's part Finnish. And she says, I thought sauna was supposed to be healthy. We felt like absolute crap. It turned out we didn't drink enough and we didn't have enough electrolytes. And I think that's the one setting where you really feel it if you don't hydrate enough, and especially if you don't have enough sodium and other electrolytes going on, you feel this like muscle soreness. So yeah, you have to pay attention to how much you're sweating more than you think, I think is the takeaway. So pay attention to that.
And I just want to add that there's a huge market right now for electrolyte supplements. Don't just drink those. That's just drinking salt. The only time you really need to drink those is if you are exercising in extreme heat for a prolonged period of time, or you're doing a lot of sauna and you're sweating for way more than you usually do for a long period of time. Some of these electrolyte packets have as much as a gram of salt in them, which is a tremendous amount of salt. If you were to go put a gram of salt on your food, you probably wouldn't eat it because it would not taste good. So when people ask me, well, what do you do in the lab? We do use electrolyte supplements in the lab during the protocol that Bill got. And I will say, because people ask me what brand, so I'll just preempt it. We often use Noon tablets, which are a blend of electrolytes. It's somewhat lower in the salt compared to an LMNT packet. I think one Noon is 150 milligrams. An LMNT packet is a full gram. So we're using a lower dose supplement, and it works just fine for people.
I'm going to add some specificity, because I think people aren't aware of how much salt they do or they don't lose. And there are little devices out there that you can get to kind of measure your salt losses. I had this done at the Corey Stringer Institute in a kind of laboratory gold standard way. And they found that, in intense exercise in the heat, I would lose about 1 liter plus an hour of sweat and about 800 to 900 grams of sodium, which is about the same as the concentration in your blood, which is 0.9%.
Milligrams.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, milligrams. And so they use that as a kind of benchmark. But again, if you're just kind of going for a mountain bike ride here or a hike, the French fries in the American diet are probably take care of the electrolyte needs. We get enough sodium, I think, is the takeaway.
So I don't need 3 vitamin waters a day, is what I'm hearing.
No.
Thanks. Ashley, we spent some time this winter talking about sleep in the last learning lab. And I'm wondering if you can remind us the relationship between temperature and ideal sleep.
Yes. So this is one of my favorite topics, folks. When you are going about your day, your body temperature is on a circadian rhythm. Your body temperature is the coolest in the middle of the night, and it's the warmest in the middle of the day, right? It looks like that nice big curve. So what you really want to be doing when you're getting ready to sleep is encouraging your body temperature to drop. And one of the funny things you might not realize is that when you take a hot shower for 5 minutes, that's encouraging your body temperature to drop. Remember why? It's causing vasodilation in your fingers, your feet, your skin, so that your core temperature, which is where most of your heat is, your blood circulates from your core out to your skin and your blood cools. So getting out of a hot shower, your body temperature actually starts to drop. Now, I said hot shower for like 5 minutes. If you're in the shower for an hour, this is a different conversation. But if you take a warm shower at the start of the night, it can help your body temperature start dropping so that you can fall asleep more easily. Similarly, you can put on, I always tell people, wear socks. No one can fall asleep with cold feet. Why? You need the skin in your feet to be able to experience vasodilation so that your blood can cool. So again, sleep in a cool room, and if you're going to do vigorous exercise, it's best not to do it right before bed because that does increase your core temperature. People ask me, well, when should I use the sauna? This is a very complicated question. Bill talked about being heat adapted. If you are more heat adapted, you can get away with using the sauna later in the day than someone who's not heat adapted. Why? People who are heat adapted are able to recover more quickly after heat exposure and get back to their regular body temperature. If you're not used to that, it might take your body way longer to recover. Your heart rate might stay higher. That's another thing that needs to drop to sleep. So when you're getting started using heat therapy, earlier in the day is good. And once you've built up more of a tolerance, you can move it later in the day.
Yeah.
I could talk about this for 10 hours though, so I should stop.
We could. I mean, being heat adapted means your body temperature is lower, and you have more ability to control your body temperature in a situation like that. So,
And recover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and recover. Yeah.
Shed heat.
Yeah.
So if I struggle to put my phone down before bed, maybe I can balance that by taking a shower and putting on socks? No?
Bring your phone into the shower.
No.
Bill, you presented a lot of great, compelling data that shows why heat could potentially have better outcomes. Chuck, I'm wondering if you can really specifically tell us why we think heat impacts longevity.
No, not really, but there are some hints, and it comes from some of the work that we've done. Heat acutely produces changes in the immune system. It does a lot of heat shock protein stuff too, but it causes changes in the immune system that look a lot like exercise. And there's a whole discussion actually about heat as a potential substitute, maybe we could say, for folks that don't have, for whatever reason, the capacity to really do more rigorous exercise. It has a very interesting immunological signature. That signature actually, and now the folks at Harvard have sort of replicated this, seems to, if you can activate this immune signature, it actually then predicts being less depressed after getting one of these heat treatments that we're talking about, even weeks later. It's quite interesting. So I think the best going idea is that time-limited exposure to high heat, like people do in a sauna or like we do in our studies, activates pathways in the brain and body that, if you do them often enough, set you up probably with this sort of more anti-inflammatory phenotype. It basically protects you from the sort of wear and tear of having bodily systems chronically activated that many of us do in the modern world, that they evolved to help us fight infection and to deal with very strong acute stressors. But in the modern world, where they're kind of free-ranging and running at this chronic, low, grinding speed, they just, over time, they damage the body and the brain. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but there's this very compelling sort of string of circumstantial points of evidence that would suggest that. But basically, heat works somewhat like exercise, and it tends, when you do it on a more regular basis, to set you up with an anti-inflammatory phenotype in your body, which we know tends to promote health. And also mental health, right? Because inflammation, and this has been studied for years, we did these studies years ago that launched this whole field showing that when you're inflamed, when your immune system is activated in these ways, it doesn't just cause heart disease or strokes. These chemicals get into the brain and they make people depressed. It's really striking. And it's interesting, we were talking about the studies we're doing here. There's very interesting data emerging from the work that we and others have done, that psychedelics may also activate these sort of chronic anti-inflammatory pathways that might enhance healthy aging. Hence, this sort of discussion about the study we're getting ready to launch, looking at whether psilocybin would induce some of those same changes in these inflammatory and oxidative stress pathways that we think heat also helps address.
Are you able to say a little bit more about our Next Innovation Center study?
Tina, can I say a little more about Tina? Tina keeps an eye on what we can say about stuff. No, not really, other than to say that, when I was in my little introduction, I talked about the fact that it's really quite striking that here in this valley, we are doing this amazing cutting edge research, looking at these sort of ancient ways of healing and reapplying them into mental health in the modern world. But we are really teeing up, and I think hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, we will be launching a study that will really be the first study in the world, to our knowledge, that will look at this question of whether these incredible findings that were developed by Dr. Hecker, who's here in the audience, in animals, do they translate to people? And if they do, can we understand, whether psychedelics hold promise in this regard, whether they're sort of a gateway into looking at other similar ways of doing something that would enhance healthy aging. It really is what you're talking about this sort of question of, can we identify agents of one sort or other that basically put the brain and body in a state where they're less likely to begin wearing out before you die? Because that's really, we're not going to live forever. But if we can live fully up to the moment that we don't live, that's the key. And so anyway, yes, so that we're, as I said, I've been studying psychedelics for 15 years as a novel treatment for depression. And I never would have guessed that they would hold this potential fascinating promise for enhancing healthy aging. But that's what's great about science. You think you're doing one thing, you follow the data, and then whole new vistas open up. So yes, stay tuned. Vail, within the next year, Vail is really going to be on the sort of international cutting edge of looking at these questions that are directly relevant to what we were talking about with heat, but again, here looking at whether psychedelics may have some of the same benefits.
How incredible that we can bring that to our
amazing.
tiny community here. Thank you, Chuck. This question isn't from the audience, it's my question. So this is what happens when you give me a microphone, I take advantage. Bill, I'm really interested in the part of your work around community, because I think when we talk about heat, we often talk about the physiological benefits, cognitive or psychological, but I'm really interested in the community component. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I was kind of amazed in Finland to see how social the saunas we went to actually were, and that was something that I didn't expect, and it seemed to be almost the point of the way that they used it. But there's sort of a movement of social saunas or community saunas kind of popping up in various places around the country, from here to Salt Lake City to rural Wisconsin. And I think, and you guys can maybe speak to this more, but one thing that popped up in some of the early studies of heat and depression, I'm always looking for the scientific explanation for these things, why people feel social in a sauna. But one of the things that you guys talked about that popped up in some of these early studies of hyperthermia and depression was that these depressed people would start talking and chatting after their treatment. And normally that's not what depressed people do. And so the heat seems to disinhibit us in some way because it's so stressful. And going through that stress, we kind of lower our barriers to talking to others. And so you can have great conversations in sauna. I was in a sauna in Salt Lake a couple of months ago with a bunch of dudes, and nobody was talking. And then this kid comes in and he pours way too much water on the rocks, just way too much. And this blast of steam comes out. And everybody's just like, oh man, we're just dying. And then it passes. And then this great conversation breaks out, starting with, you idiot, what were you doing? And then we're like talking, and somebody's talking about their Continental Divide Trail hike, and somebody's talking about work and relationship. And it was really interesting what happened. So heat seems to unlock something.
So I'll make a comment about that, and then you should talk about the study you're doing. But it's very true. So when we did the first studies with this heat machine in depressed people, actually the first one in Switzerland, we noticed, people, they would start, and they wouldn't just talk. In this case, they would start talking about intimate things in their life, about a trauma or about, a tragedy in their life. And it was so striking that it got me thinking, of course, this is exactly that. I think heat works as an antidepressant psychologically through this mechanism, that it essentially activates prosocial pathways, which is why things like sweat lodge, right? People have discovered repeatedly that it's a social lubricant. And it was such a powerful effect that when we started the study in Arizona, we needed, kind of quote guinea pigs. So people in my lab would get in the device and we'd practice doing it. And it was folks that worked under me in this setup. They wouldn't let me in the room because they didn't want me to hear the stuff that they knew they were going to talk about, because they would start talking probably about me mostly, So it's and you've seen this also, right? It's exactly that. It activates pathways in the body and the brain that have antidepressant effects, because I think there's such a strong link in humans between social connection and well-being. But to talk for a second about what you're doing in San Francisco.
Yeah. So in the past several years, we actually capitalized on this. And in addition to giving people heat treatment, we give them cognitive behavioral therapy with a licensed therapist in my lab. And so once people get a heat treatment, then the next day we'll have them meet with a therapist. And they're still kind of in this afterglow, this openness. And one of the most difficult things to do when you're trying to treat someone with depression is to get them to engage. So we're basically giving ourselves this advantage of giving them a heat treatment, and then the next day they're really ready to engage with an excellent therapist who can teach them skills. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's like a toolbox of different ways to think, different ways to relate to your feelings and so on. And once you teach people these skills, it's kind of like Santa. You can't unknow them. Once you learn, oh, I can do this, you can't unknow that. So we did a bunch of experiments giving people both of these treatments. And in our first study, I think our depression remission rate was 91%. So 91% of the people who got both the heat and the therapy no longer had clinical depression at the end. In the second study that we followed that up with, it was about 86% of the people who did heat and psychotherapy got better. And we actually just got funded to do a study with Harvard, Cleveland Clinic, and UCSF that I'm going to lead out of UCSF. It's called a multi-center study where we're going to test this now in 3 different hospitals at the same time. On top of that, I'm also leading a study that is pretty out there. It's pretty different, but we're actually directly testing whether encouraging people, giving people literal passes to go to a giant sauna in the middle of San Francisco, a 40-person huge sauna, giving people who are higher on loneliness passes to go to this sauna with their friends or with their family every week can help reduce their feelings of loneliness and increase their feelings of social connection. It's a real-world, messy study. And in the first phase of the study, we're just giving 15 people these passes and we're measuring all of these feelings of loneliness and social connection. In the second part of the study, we're randomizing people to either go to a coffee shop with a friend, and we're gonna pay for that, or go to a sauna with a friend, and we're gonna pay for that. And we're gonna see, after 8 weeks, which of these types of interventions actually had an effect. Because if this idea like, oh, it's just about socializing, the heat doesn't actually matter, then we'll see that effect in the coffee shop. But if there's something magic and special about the heat, then we might see a difference between these 2 groups. And the Tiny Blue Dot Foundation is actually funding that study, and the multi-center study is the National Institutes of Health funding that. So,
Wow, that's amazing. I can't wait to see those results. Well, we have a couple minutes left. So to the panel, I'm wondering if there is a takeaway from today that you would like the audience to have. We've shared so much information, so many great stories. What's the one tidbit you'd like them to walk away with?
I'll go first. I loved your takeaways, Bill.
Oh.
Yeah, the older I get, I thought that was really profound. I love the picture of the guy walking up the stairs too. And in that spirit, and we're working on this right now, when we look at our studies, you made a comment that even less levels of heat probably help people. And our data suggest exactly that there's this sort of upward curve that this is now in these studies where we're heating people up pretty hot. Not everybody gets to the same heat the way we designed them, but you can see this really nice kind of rising thing where even lower levels of heat made people feel less depressed than, sort of like way, way lower levels in heat. So this is not all or none stuff. And this constant pushing towards sort of biohacked perfection, I think is a kind of a cancerous thing in terms of what really matters about well-being. So I love that. So that's my takeaway is, your 3 points are just a beautiful thing to think about as we think about these issues about healthy aging.
Well, thank you. You took my takeaways, though.
Sorry, but you can.
That's why he wanted to go first.
That's why I wanted to go first.
I think, for me, I think the takeaway is that sometimes you can learn something by leaning into the thing that you think you don't like or something that seems uncomfortable. And that can be heat, cold, it could be a difficult conversation. I think personally, I tended to avoid stuff like that, and especially heat. And so leaning into it, making it part of my life in a safe way, taught me a lot and kind of changed me as an athlete and a person. And now I love going to sauna. So anybody wants to go to sauna, I'm up.
well, what they said. And then I think my big takeaway is there is no one size fits all with anything. In my lab, what we have found with these heat therapies is that for many people, it doesn't matter how hot we get them in the tube. People who didn't get that hot still got just as much of an antidepressant effect.
Now you tell me.
I know. Sorry, Bill. And so chasing this biohacker benchmark type thing that Bill commented on, I tell people, please just stop. We don't necessarily need to get you that hot for that long. Everybody's different. Some people are going to hit that mark earlier than other people. And the only way to figure this out is going to be individualized health. And individualized health provision is really, really complicated. And that's why it's just really important to notice things about yourself and stay there. Don't say, well, this person's doing that. This person said to do that. Please don't take those prescriptions. Listen to yourself. I dread the day when I go and I ask Bill, hey, you want to go to lunch? And he's like, let me check my app and see if I'm hungry. Like, please don't outsource your feeling. Pay attention. You don't need someone a device or a expensive fancy thing to tell you if you ate enough, if you slept enough. Just keep listening to your body.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill, Paige, Chuck, Ashley. What a delightful morning. I think we all learned a little something. Keep it simple. 3 things. And to me, one of the most important, find the joy.